Men fight for liberty and win it with hard knocks. Their children brought up easy, let it slip away again, poor fools, and their grandchildren at once more slaves. That was D.H. Lawrence, 1921. And this is AllMinucOne. I am Bill. Nice to meet you. If I asked you, of the many things that may be lacking in society today, what would you think that would be? What is the biggest thing that society might be lacking? You might throw out ideas like compassion or love or other emotional type pleas. But I would say it's lacking leadership, especially very individualistic leadership and leadership in the families. I'm going to read you another quote. Leadership is intangible, hard to measure, and difficult to describe. Its quality would seem to stem from many factors, but certainly they must include a measure of inherent ability to control and direct, self-confidence based on expert knowledge, initiative, loyalty, pride, and a sense of responsibility. Inherent ability cannot be instilled, but that which is latent or dormant can be developed. Other ingredients can be acquired. They are not easily learned, but leaders can be and are made. And that was General C.B. Cates of the 19th Commandant of the Marine Corps. Now, the reason why I used his quote specifically is because he talks about how these things are latent or dormant and that they can be developed. And I feel like that there is just not a lot of leadership on a ground level of individuals within families, within communities, within churches, and within our government. There just really isn't. So with that, we're going to talk about different ideas of leadership, but one of the big prevalent problems with leadership is that it is seen archetypically as masculine. And so we're going to talk about masculine and feminine archetypes and a little bit about Marine Corps leadership traits and principles. So archetypes are essentially what we could consider the unconscious universe, the unconscious forms and ideas that are cross-cultural throughout history. One of those archetypes is of the father. It's one of the main psychological archetypes. And its ideal form is also one of the most demonized and ignored within the current Western cultural zeitgeist. So let's get into specifically what things would call about the father archetype in your mind. The symbology of a piercing weapon or a beam of light are related to a father within almost all cultures. In fact, it's part of, in a way, the sexual act for a man, correct? So sun and rain can represent the fertilization of the mother. And the mother, most often, as people know, Mother Earth, the kind of mystical ancient language, Mother Earth, brings forth the crops, nourishes the people. The offspring of the world come from Mother Earth. Well, the father has to first seed it and nourish it. And the father archetype has to continue to nourish and feed its offsprings with its marriage in Mother Earth. So the father archetype takes the form of God or lesser gods, giants, kings, leaders, judges, healers, holy men, wise men, etc. Those were the light aspects, though. There are dark sides, the shadow, if you will. And that shadow is things like tyrants, executioners, and the devil himself. The benevolent father is a figure of authority, discipline, wisdom, rationality, inspiration, understanding, and law and order. He guides and protects those under him. He takes action when needed, but is not hasty, and carefully considers when it is possible Examples of this, just from culture, a great example is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, or someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then how does a man live up to this ideal of a character, right? This ideal archetypical father. How do you live up to this? Who teaches you this? What have you done in your life to be a good father? Many of us just go to work, and if we have children, then we obviously provide for them and take care of them, but there's no user manual on being a parent. So you have to have some sort of underlying things to know how to lead. And you can take these things from stories and good examples, but most people don't look into stories that deeply. They don't think about the timelessness of how many stories unfold. In fact, that's what makes a good story good, usually, is that it has timeless elements. So one of the things that we have to do is we need to integrate ourselves, and we need to remain vigilant and seeking out what we do wrong, our sins, and all those kind of things. But we also, again, need guiding principles. So as a young man, I was a Marine, and I took to heart these leadership principles and leadership traits. Now, there's a little acronym called JJDIDTIEBUCKLE. That stands for judgment, justice, dependability, initiative, decisiveness, tact, integrity, enthusiasm, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, and endurance. And in fact, these were things that I had to know off the top of my head with their definitions, an appropriate definition. I'm going to give you definitions of these, but it's going to be kind of a summation. I'm going to keep it as brief as possible. So the first one is justice, and that is giving reward and punishment according to the merits of the case. The ability to administer a system of rewards and punishment. That makes sense, but some people think justice is something else. So as simple as keeping that mindset, that frame, that there is a specific meaning for justice, that you have a specific meaning for words, allows you to have a guide to direct you for leadership. Judgment, the ability to weigh facts and possible course of action in order to make sound decisions. It's pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of people have poor judgment. And a lot of people with poor judgment never learn themselves or make the wise decision and learn from others' mistakes. Dependability, the certainty of proper performance of duty. Basically, show up to work, right? Show up to work. Do the things that you are supposed to do. Go do your family events or whatever it is, the things that you need to do in your community or amongst your church or the charities that you may take part of. Be dependable, be reliable. Initiative, that is taking action in absence of orders. You know, one thing I hate more than anything is having to be a micromanager, and I actually refuse to do it. If you can't do it, I ask you, and I have to stand over your shoulder, and you can't do it on your own, then you're not someone I want to work for me or with me. And that's we're going to get into some principles later on that this will be very appropriate. The next one is decisiveness. That is the ability to make decisions promptly and to announce them in a clear and forceful manner. Now, in the military, they encourage you to yell a lot. I'm not a yeller. I mean, I can be, but I always believe that people that yell are the individuals that aren't listened to. The person that yells all the time is someone who, that's what you expect of them. They're always going to yell. The person who's quiet, but is at least forceful in what they need in their decisions, when they yell, it means something. So again, the ability to make decisions promptly. This is important because many people hem-haw around about what they do, about what needs to be done when action needs to be taken. Sometimes you have time to weigh different options. Often, especially in a combat scenario, you must just act. And that will come to another thing, that even if you make the wrong mistake, you have to own up to it. The next one is tact, the ability to deal with others in a manner that will maintain good relations and avoid offense. More simply stated, tact is the ability to say and do the right thing at the right time. Integrity, uprightness of character, soundness of moral principle. I think we could use a lot more of that in our world. I think there's a lot of disintegrous people out there. They're not only disintegrous with others, but with themselves. And that is a huge one. Because if you cannot be honest with yourself, for certain you will never be honest with other people. Enthusiasm, the display of sincere interest or exuberance in the performance of duty. Bearing, creating a favorable impression in carriage, appearance, and personal conduct at all times. Now, this is for certain a Marine Corps thing, because even in their utility uniforms and our camis, they want you to look pretty, and you got to dress blues and all that stuff, and you're gonna look good. And they have not only physical fitness standards, but we have standards of weight based on height. Now, it's a little outdated with BMI, or at least while I was in. Maybe they have a better system now, but there's a certain appearance they want you to have. You know, they want you to be seen as a handsome, young, lean, mean fighting machine. Unselfishness, avoidance of providing for one's own comfort and personal advancement at the expense of others. That's pretty clear, right? A good leader will always put himself last. A good leader will always lead from the front. They will always be the first out of a vehicle. They will always have Marines follow them. A good leader will be the last to eat, making sure that all of his troops have eaten first. Courage. Courage is a mental quality that recognizes fear and danger or criticism. Now, you recognize fear and danger and criticism, but you still go toward it with calmness and firmness. You go toward it, recognizing it's the first step to be able to conquer it. When you reject criticism or fear, you are just going to lash out. Knowledge, understanding of science or an art, the range of one's information, including professional knowledge or understanding of your Marines. Loyalty, the quality of faithfulness to country, corps, unit, seniors, subordinates, and peers. Marine Corps is always faithful, Semper Fi, right? It's the motto. Now, what I want to highlight here is that the order of this, but also the importance of it. Country, corps, your unit, seniors, subordinates, and peers. So it goes up and down. But I don't believe that this is ordered this way for any other reason than the country is superior to the corps, and the corps is superior to your unit. Your unit is superior to your seniors. And of course, subordinates and peers is a whole other thing that's self-explanatory. Endurance, the mental and physical stamina measured by the ability to withstand pain, fatigue, stress, and hardship. Now, this is a hard one because it takes time to build all of these qualities, but this last one especially. Endurance is going on no matter what. I'm making this video today after 2 days of basically 5 hours of sleep and waking up every 30 minutes. I am extremely exhausted today, so I'm not going to be sharp as normal. But I said I was going to make this video today. So that was me being dependable and me having the endurance to do it. But I'm not here to puff myself up. I'm here to share knowledge. And from that, we're going to move on to the shadow of the father archetype. And the reason why I read these traits off first is because the shadow will always lack these kind of traits. And people lack these guiding principles and traits because they're underdeveloped. They've never considered it. They've never been mentored. They've never been taught it. They don't understand it, and they don't think about it. And so they operate in life without any true depth of understanding of their own character or the character of others. So with the father archetype, the shadow, which is, with the father archetype, normally you would get caring and guidance and protection, but with the shadow side, you get abuse of authority. Now, I believe in most of my professional careers, I've seen this time and time and time again. I hear it from people constantly. It is abundant. It is easy for people to abuse their authority, to not care about their subordinates, and to take advantage. And it takes a very moral person to do otherwise. So let's see. The negative father archetype involves rigidity, control, and a cold intellectual way of relating. This leads to ego and intellectual inflation and a state of hubris. So if your father is more leaning towards the shadow and he does not have these leadership abilities, and father's playing such a big role in our lives, obviously it is going to affect our psyches. That is to say, your very soul. And if you have a benevolent father, that's going to affect your mental attitude and your mental image. And your father is also your first understanding, your first mental image of what God is. There is no child under the age of 4 that understands the complexities of the world. They only know actions, and they know the actions of their father and mother. Now, I want to repeat that, father and mother, and I want to ask you if that sounds strange to you. If one of those seems subordinate, I want to ask you if you would prefer mother and father. And I want to throw something out there. These are questions to make you think. And I want to throw out the idea that when the parental dynamic is out of balance, that there's psychological damage to the child. Whether it's direct abuse to the child or not, that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about the balance of leadership and power between men and women. And also a deeper idea with the Anima and the Animus, which we will get to in a bit. So it appears to me, and many others, that in the cultural zeitgeist, the feminine archetype has become very, very strong and powerful. I want to read to you from a short excerpt from a book called Feminine Lost: Why Most Women Are Male by Jennifer Granger. This was published in January 28th, 2014. Now, a quote from, I believe I took this from Goodreads, just explaining the book briefly. Feminine Lost explores the premise that all human beings are constructed of 2 energies, one masculine and one feminine. With the rise of the feminist movement, many women have migrated to their masculine side. This is the Animus. Some to an extent of losing access to their feminine side, or the Anima. As a consequence, men have found their way to the feminine side. So men have found their way to the Anima. This process has huge consequences for relationships between men and women, often leaving them feeling unsatisfied with the relationships or lonely without one. Now, this has happened primarily because within our society, we are continually trying to go through these giant cultural revolutions and ignoring our deeper spiritual selves, our psyches, our souls. We're ignoring good leadership. We're ignoring what it means to be a man and a woman. That's why we're seeing, one of the reasons why we're seeing at least, a lot of this gender confusion stuff going on. There is other factors to that. There's the cultural Marxist side of that. But regardless, it is far more complicated on a psychic realm, if you would, a spiritual realm, a soul realm. And the reason why I can say that is because it's been seen over and over again by many people who study philosophy and psychology. It's not just an opinion that I'm out here in the dark with. So I just want to read you real quick from her book. It says, vast numbers of women embrace their new manliness and new ways never before seen in human history. Many become fully male in every sense of the word except physically. They become highly male-oriented women who are ambitious, competitive, and even aggressive. Two archetypes of the most highly andro, the villainous andro woman, and her sister, the virtuous andro, is an important to note, and that their other three female archetypes are also masculine-oriented, but they are male to varying degrees and have different motivations. At the same time as the world was changing, with women embracing their new masculinity, men began tapping into their feminine side. In fact, there are huge numbers of men today who are very comfortable with their feminine side of themselves. As mentioned under my inner male-female paradigm, these female-oriented men fall under three broad archetypes. So just a little bit further down, she starts going into certain feminine archetypes. There is another group of male women who have held on to the very powerful facade of being feminine. They are master manipulators of any man they set their sights on. They look like a woman, they walk like a woman, but unfortunately, that is where the analogy ends. In this case, you are not dealing with a full-blown feminine being. She is indeed so falsely feminine that I have named her the faux feminine woman. She goes on to talk about cougars and some other stuff, but the point is this is just an observation from a book that came out 6 years ago of the changing dynamics of men and women. Now, when people talk to me about gender stereotypes, I completely disagree based on the actual science, the actual literature, and personality, the Big Five personality scale, as well as some other personality scales that you can look at, that that there aren't gender norms. There absolutely are. And they are cross-cultural. And it has nothing to do with wearing pink or wearing blue. It has to do with certain behaviors, and mostly the biggest difference between men and women are what their interests are in. So I'm going to read to you a few negative female archetypes, and then I'm going to read you a positive one. Now, I also say this from a lot of personal experience because there was a time I used to date a lot, and I have seen in the modern world what it is to date and various women. And before I had myself organized, I was attracting a certain type over and over again. And fortunately, now I'm married to a very lovely woman, but I had to get myself straight first. So, quote, "The devouring mother consumes her children psychologically and emotionally, and often instills in them feelings of guilt at leaving her or becoming independent." That is Carol Miss. Now, these are some quotes I took from a site called Fractal Enlightenment. Only because it just spoke of archetypes, and it's hard to get information about archetypes without getting into a lot of academic papers of feminists saying that Jungian archetypes and the like are completely wrong and they're sexist and misogynist and a bunch of other nonsense. These have existed from ancient times forward. They will still exist. And whether it's in your dreams or other countries, they have existed forever, and they show up over and over again in different cultures that are not even connected. And there's a reason for that. And it's what Jung called the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is something like either God speaking to us or an inner programming that evolved within us because we do have a biological nature. So, quote, having spawned her child, found her mate, or simply turned around to prey on her existing family or circle of friends, the devouring mother is much like a co-dependent. High on a drug of assistance, she smothers her child with an excess of love, stifling their very growth and suffocating those around her, even resorting to child abuse to get her way. The devouring mother comes from a place inside of us that is afraid to be alone, afraid of solitude, in a guise of loneliness, afraid to be herself. Having served others for so long, she becomes obsessive, controlling, even violent in her need to assert her control over the rest of us. Much like the darker aspects of the sacred feminine, such as the female fatale, female trickster, she's using her role as the ultimate identity and lets it feed her ego, forgetting that a mother, as well as a guide to her children, must also know when to let them find their own way and control their own destinies. Excuse me. Now, this is a common theme that comes up, the devouring mother. And you have probably seen people like this. I know people who have mothers like this. They can't leave home. Their mother babies them and they're grown adults. They're never pushing themselves to get a job, a good job at least. They have everything done for them. They're in their 20s or 30s and mom still does their laundry, makes their bed, cooks them dinner. That is not a grown-up. That is a 30-year-old child. And that is the psychic damage that a devouring mother can commit to her own child. Another negative archetype is the snow or ice queen. This is a matriarch, so intent on shielding herself from the pains of being heartbroken again, she has created a whole environment of hostility around her. She is a fearsome 80s boss, or perhaps more stereotypical feminist man-hater. They all begin with the Snow Queen, her ultimate conclusion being the melting of the ice and the resolution to trust again. Often ignited by a compassionate stranger who unknowingly wanders into her world. Gender aside, the Ice Queen represents the forgotten importance of the feminine, a benevolent reciprocity. And her desire to behave like a man in order to survive is this sometimes dog-eat-dog world. Now, I want to remind you, it says gender aside. The writer of this is a man, and he's not talking about women. He's talking about an archetype. That archetype is represented by women, though. But you have to understand the idea that we both have male and female aspects within ourselves. Obviously, if you're a man, you should present more as a man, at least biologically speaking. And we will get into that, into the Anima and the Animus here briefly. Now, within the same article, he mentions a third female archetype, and this is a woman that, as Jung would say, would be individualized. She would have been in control of herself. She would have conquered her shadow. She would have got a hold of her animus and would have done all the self-work so that she could be this amazing person. And I happen to be married to a person like this. I mean, she's not perfect by any means, but neither am I, and I don't know who is. But I am very blessed to have a very lovely person for a wife. And this is the benevolent goddess. Quote, she's had to scramble out of the mire and secure her boundaries once and for all, neither becoming angered about those who want to take advantage, nor let it go on for the rest of her days. That's important, guys, because whether you're a male or female, people will try and take advantage of you. And it's very easy to just get resentful and mad and then let that build in your shadow and throw that out in the world. And you can't do it. You got to learn to let stuff go. She has found the true balance between the masculine and the feminine energies and made her stand without freezing her heart. The benevolent goddess is like an overflowing cup of loving kindness. She is devoid of ego and takes nothing personally. She has learnt how to refill her cup by herself and needs no one else's approval or compliments. She knows the value of her own beauty and lets no one drain her of it, nor does she try to dictate it to anyone else. Many will be jealous and covet her energy, but she will rise above their bait. She is entirely self-assured. She is the source of life that gives birth to every moment, entirely swimming in the creativity of the source. Every person is her child. She is in no need, excuse me, she is in no need of a consort, yet enjoys and feels unthreatened by male company. I want to pause there real quick because think about the people that you hear about that talk that are threatened just being around male company, or project that at least. You know, we hear a lot of women have to be afraid when they walk down the street at night. Well, I'm not really afraid of much, but or at least I embrace my fear most of the time. But there are certainly places where I walk down the street and I've been fearful. That is not unique to a woman. That is a universal feeling. All right, continuing with the text. She is athletic like Athena, yet also sensual like Aphrodite, entirely comfortable her unique form and sexuality, yet unattached to it. So whatever her form is, whatever she is, she's comfortable with her sexuality or her sexual power as a woman, but she's not attached to it. She doesn't use that as a weapon. The benevolent goddess, above all, has struck the perfect balance between giving and receiving. Receiving not compliments about her appearance or financial and material support, but energy and love from her inner well and from that of the universe. It is this that enables her to give constantly without resentment or exhaustion. So here we see this beautiful woman who's just perfectly comfortable in herself. She has no spite in her heart. She's loving and caring, and she's one of those people that people just want to be around. You know, you see, this is a person that children latch onto immediately, and they're good with children. And I know a lot of the stuff I'm reading is very esoteric, it's mystical, but you have to understand the wisdom in these things, whether you believe in the actual metaphysics of it, let's say. So another article that we're going to take from the same page, just a short excerpt, is going to talk about the Anima and the Animus. Very briefly. The best way to imagine the anima, animus, is to picture a yin-yang in your mind. This goes back to that that universal unconsciousness that we see throughout time. The yin and yang symbol means something, right? What got Jung on looking at symbols was the mandala specifically and how it was all over the place. We see this with crosses. We see this, not anymore because people have demonized the Nazis, but we see this with swastikas. We see this with all kinds of symbols throughout time. And I've spent a lot of time, at least when I was younger, in my 20s, studying the occult. And you see these things go back very far and appear over and over and over again. So this isn't just something that's out of nowhere. It is a reality. So let's get back to the text. The anima is a black dot on the white side, and the animus is the white dot on the black side. Men are like walking white sides with black dots. Women are like walking black sides with white dots. An individuated man will have a more prominent and magnanimous black dot, just as an individuated woman will have a more prominent and magnanimous white dot. A less psychologically healthy person, their dots will be but pinpricks. So that, I'm not going to go much further into that, but you have to understand that there's a part of you, small part, that is male or female, and the more in touch with it you'll be, the more that will grow. It's not going to take over your personality, but what it will do is allow you to be a stronger person. You know, it will allow you to not be part or not project your shadow or not go to that shadow, that dark side. And with that, we're going to talk about the dark side of the father archetype. I have a quote real quick. Man will become better when you show him what he is like. And that's from Anton Chekhov, the famous Russian writer. This is from innerspace.me. This is a very good article about the dark father. And I quote, "The dark father of unbridled rationality eats his own children, just as Kronos did in the ancient legend." He's talking about the Greek creation story. He might not actually physically eat them as Kronos the Titan did, but by the weight of his controlling and stultifying authority, he represses their psychological growth and prevents them from ever becoming what they could be otherwise. Now, I want you to remember, we just read about that devouring mother, right? Men can do this too. I brought up the women, though, because women do this too. And it is up to both men and women to not do this. Continuing, control in this context doesn't just mean telling people what to do and what not to do, when to do it and when not to do it. It means telling us how to see the world. But it isn't enough simply to say this. It's not just that we have been told how to see the world. We are told in such a way that we don't realize that we actually have been told how to see the world. Kronos, the archetypical dark father, eats his own children. He devours them before they can amount to very much. He devours them before they can get to the stage of challenging his authority. Since later on we see, as we now from the legends that have passed down to us, he slipped up, tricked by his wife, and failed to devour the infant son Zeus. And this slip-up was the beginning of the end of him. So in a way, he had a self-fulfilling prophecy. Zeus, with the help of his mother, who was naturally not happy to have all of her children eaten by the infanticidal father, and was reared elsewhere in secret. Later, Zeus returned in all of his strength to defeat his father and the rest of the Titans and the war to end all wars. And a little bit further, it goes on to say, so in a way, we can say that Kronos was right to eat his children. He knew what would happen if he didn't. That's an important thing, because that right there says that if your devouring the devouring mother wants to infantilize their children and not let them grow up, the devouring father wants to be in control. He wants to be a dictator and a tyrant. He wants to be more powerful. And that comes usually from a place of weakness, where you know inside, if you ever examined yourself, that you are actually very weak. And in order to feel powerful, you have to make others weak. All right, back to the quote here. Kronos devouring his children and the war between God and the Titans that followed has immense psychological significance, which is, of course, what gives the myth the power that it still has. The significance that we're talking about here has to do with the struggle between the dark, repressive force of the unconscious and the emergent consciousness, which, despite being fragile in its beginnings, is a force that in time, if allowed to grow and become strong, will overturn the whole order of things. From a psychological point of view, therefore, we can say that the odds are very much against consciousness surviving very long before being devoured by the forces of unconsciousness. Excuse me. So, what we see is when you start to become conscious of a thing, say something in your shadow, something in your true self, maybe something in your anima or your animus, as it emerges to your conscious, the unconscious removes it, because you almost have this, this is actually neurologically true, these feedback loops in your brain, physiologically true, that you create these pathways, and as you feed them, as you continue to do the poor behavior, they grow stronger. And as you do, or as you stop doing that behavior, they grow weaker, but they remain. An interesting thing, a little caveat here, that the idea of the Garden of Eden, right, where Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they knew nothing of right and wrong before. Well, the reason was not because the fruit was magical, but because there was no such thing. There was nothing forbidden to them. And when they did so, they understood that they did something wrong, that they weren't supposed to. And with that, they understood sin. Now, we know, again, on a neurological level, that if that pathway is not there, the first time you do something, it is created. And then it's reinforced and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. So if you do something that's bad, say you sin against yourself, you do something you find reprehensible, it becomes easier and easier and easier for you to do over time. Now, if you don't repeat in the behavior, most likely you might suffer some psychological damage, but you will eventually be able to repair it. But if you repeat in that behavior, it will eventually begin to psychologically harm you in a very, very deep and significant way. And this, in part, in some ways, is how PTSD can work when you're in certain situations that repeat over and over and over again. Not only is it the shock of a certain situation, but often the buildup of these situations over and over again. And next thing you know, you've lost your moral compass completely. This is how mob mentalities work. You're in a mob, you're caught up in this frenzy and this excitement, and it goes a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further, and next thing you know, you're burning down buildings or beating people to death. If you ever look at the book Ordinary Men, which takes a group of police officers who are ordinary guys, and they decided to stay together throughout the Second World War, under the Axis forces, they eventually started committing atrocities like it was eating dinner by, all kinds of atrocities like, dragging pregnant women in the street and shooting them. So what is in the unconscious has to be brought to light, and the unconscious will devour what is conscious, what comes out eventually. Let's get back to the text real quick. Consciousness is always being born, just as Kronos' children were always being born, but it is very nearly inevitable that they will meet their end very quickly. Indeed, as a matter of course, as a matter of mere routine, we might say. We can see this drama, the annihilation of conscious, being acted all around us every day. Or rather, we can't see it being enacted around us every day because we'd have to be conscious, present to witness it, and we aren't. When we're safely unconscious, then everything seems fine. Everything seems dandy. Everything is as it should be. So I'm going to skip a little bit further down here. In a world where no one is their own true self, the lack of the self is hardly likely to be committed upon. In a world where everyone is asleep, being asleep is going to be seen as the right and proper way. In a world where everyone is telling the same lie, then that lie has become the truth. It's interesting he mentions the sleep part. We talked about propaganda and the Dunning-Kruger effect. People, the word is woke. You're woke. You're woke. You know these things now. You've been told. No, you've just been brainwashed. You've been put to sleep. You haven't developed yourself. You cannot really, I don't believe, allowed to be ideologically possessed by things if you develop yourself. And this is what Jung believed. This is what Jordan Peterson was teaching. Jung believed that actually the biggest thing to keep yourself from that collective mob, the greatest thing you can do is have a relationship with God. All right. Life for us has become a matter of fitting into a format, although at the same time, we don't see that we have fitted ourselves into it or that there was any format to fit into in the first place. The format has become invisible because we've fitted into it so well. When we adapt ourselves perfectly to the format, then what this means is that we are seeing the world in terms of that format. Only in its exact sense, or it isn't exactly seen as such, but assumed as such, and that the only time we bother our heads about the status quo is to notice that someone isn't fitting in and is therefore standing out, and everyone else, because of this failure to adapt. Sorry, I read that so poorly. Like I said, I've had very little sleep the last 2 days. What that said was, essentially, we don't notice the format that we're in. We don't notice the lie we're going along with. We don't notice the change of the current. We don't notice that we're being swept away until we see somebody and we go, why aren't they like me? Why don't they fit in? Why are they weird? I remember going to, out to karaoke one night. I was bored, sitting around the house. Ended up at a karaoke bar and, was chatting up with people and ended up talking to a couple girls and they were kind of flirty or whatever. And I'm like, well, I don't date. And they're like, why? That's weird. And I'm like, well, yeah, I was like, I used to date a lot and I needed to do some self-work. And so I don't date. I'm celibate, blah, blah, blah. And it was like the weirdest thing ever to them. Blew their mind because I didn't fit that format. I failed to adapt to the rest of society's standards. And the majority of society's standards are, as Aleister Crowley once said, do what thou willst. So this continues, but for the sake of brevity, essentially, I'm going to jump down way, way to the bottom. The Dark Father is the male or rational authority that our society is based upon. It is the system that defines us and regulates us once we have been defined. It is the system that tells us what life is and how we should live. It is the system that tells us what is real and what is not real. Psychologically speaking, the reason we can say that society is based on the masculine authority is because it is the expression of the rational mind. The rational mind's essential property being that it defines. It lays down the law, which is the masculine yang type principle at work. See, this is a different article from a completely different source, talking about this yin-yang again, right? The Anima and the Animus. We lose our capacity to see what assumptions have been made. In other words, we lose consciousness. So this is, again, deeply important, because the reason why you're able to be brainwashed, the reason why propaganda can get to you, the reason why other people can influence you while others can remain and hold fast is because you haven't allowed these things to come to light into your mind, and you just let them in, and that unconscious keeps devouring what might become conscious. Another thing is that I wanted to address briefly, but the system, you know, the idea of a patriarchy in the system, to some degree that is true. At the same time, I believe we're seeing the rise of a matriarchy, which I don't see as being any better, because the devouring mother essentially shackles everyone and keeps them. You know, I always say that the right and the left are two different aspects of masculine and feminine as far as politics go. And the right is, you know, wants to be your daddy, the authoritarian. If he was good and benevolent, like the good king, the benevolent father, he would want to let you go be on your own as much as possible, but still maintain order. And then the left is the feminine aspect that wants to be a devouring mother and shackle you in chains by just throwing heaps and heaps and heaps of laws, and not just laws, but also giving you no responsibility, essentially saying, well, yeah, here's you don't have to work. We'll give you money. You don't have to do this. We'll give you money. We'll cook your dinner. We'll do whatever, but you create a prison state for yourself. Now, if it was that benevolent mother, that goddess, right? What she would do is she would give you love and nurture you, but then she would let you go be free and on your own. So think about these things. Lastly, and very briefly, because I know this is getting around to be about an hour, I want to come back to those Marine Corps traits: judgment, justice, dependability, initiative, decisiveness, tact, integrity, enthusiasm, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, endurance. These are things that you can develop within yourself to keep you from being an undeveloped being, by developing these characteristics, by really working on them, by bringing them to your conscience. Right after that, those traits, there are 11 leadership principles. Know yourself and seek self-improvement as number one. What have I been saying? That's the first one. Know who you are and seek to improve yourself. I guarantee you do that. If everyone does that who hears this, the world will change. And in a good way, not in the evil way that is going. Number two, be technically and tactically proficient. Be good at what you do. Number three, know your Marines and look out for their welfare. If you are a good leader, you will always take care of your troops first. The two basic things that a Marine leader thinks about is mission accomplishment and then troop welfare. The mission must be accomplished, but troop welfare is right up there. And what happens when you don't take care of the troops? Well, you get a mutiny. You get what we see now in the streets. You get what is going on across the world. People when they feel oppressed and not taken care of, eventually lash out. Keep your Marines informed. Well, that's pretty simple, right? Let people know. Here's the thing. I have a daughter's nearly 16 years old, and I have a great relationship with her because, especially when she got older, when she got to an age of accountability, let's say a teen, and she could start to think very abstractly, she started asking me questions, and I told her honestly, I don't keep my sins from her. I want her to learn from my mistakes and all the pain and torment that I had to go through. You keep people informed because if they don't know what's going on, again, they are left to their own devices, and they feel lost, and they might believe something that isn't happening. Another reason why you keep your people informed is so that they can perform for you properly. But moving on, number 5, set the example. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you're going to be a leader, live it. Live it. And we need more leaders. We need more leaders in this world. And I don't mean leaders in government or leaders in businesses. I mean leaders in the community, leaders at home, leaders in your family. If you're a single mom, you need to be a leader. You don't need to be thinking about going out and doing crazy stuff. I'm not telling you how to live your life because I don't believe in telling people how to live their life. But what I'm saying is that if you're a good leader, you'll lead your kids, you'll take care of the things that need to be done, and you'll have your mindset in the right place. Number 6, ensure the task is understood, supervised, and accomplished. This is pretty simple. Give clear instructions. Supervise it. You don't have to do it yourself. You can delegate that. Come back and check and make sure it's done, and make sure it's done properly. Part of that is supervision. You don't have to be standing over someone's shoulder, but you just come back and check every now and again. Number 7, train your Marines as a team. Well, look, if you have a group of people, whether it's your family or it's co-workers or whatever it is in your team, you want to work as a team, and that comes down from the leader to the proper training. Number 8, make sound and timely decisions. We talked about this before with decisiveness. Make decisions wisely. Make them quickly, unless you have time to mull them over longer. But do not be indecisive. Number 9, develop a sense of responsibility amongst your subordinates. This should be like number 2, actually, because without responsibility, there is no way that you're going to develop. You're never going to be a leader, and you're never going to develop your character. Why would you develop your character if you had no responsibilities? This is the problem with that devouring mother. If you want to foster responsibility, you give people responsibility, and then you check up on them and make sure they do it right. And you, by the thing where it says know your Marines, you know them. So I'm talking using Marines as anybody, right? You know them, you know who they are, so you appropriately assign them appropriate tasks. You don't assign the guy who has the lowest IQ in your squad or your platoon or something like that the most intellectual task. You know, it's okay that he's not the smartest guy. He can do other stuff that's good. But that's also knowing what who your people are, right? Number 10, employ your command in accordance with its capabilities. Same thing I just said. And number 11, seek responsibility and take responsibility for your actions. And if everybody did this, the world would be a better place. So, this was the longest one I've done yet, but I'm glad we got through it. I'm glad everyone could bear with me in my super tired state. And I want to ask everyone who got this far, if you liked it, and you might have liked it if you got this far, to like, share, and subscribe. Also, I have a Bitchute channel now, library, and Brighteon, that'll be on there. And I will have a subscribe star. Now, I know I don't really have any viewers yet, but it will be there if anyone wants to patronize me. So this has been AllMinucOne, and I'm Bill, and I wish you all well. This is 4th of July weekend. Have a great weekend. Celebrate the great nation of America, please. And think for yourself, please. Think for yourself and develop yourselves, people. Love you. Goodbye.